One Day. Written by Just Thinking Drabbles. Read by Rashi. Hubert knocked on the door of the Prime Minister's office, but he didn't wait for an answer as he entered inside. He knew that Ferdinand wouldn't mind and was probably expecting him, considering the fact that they had scheduled to have a tea date this afternoon. And while it was true that he could have met Ferdinand there, he preferred the option of accompanying him to the gardens instead, so that he could have even more time to listen to the man's lovely voice chatter about the events of his day. If Hubert had decided for once to delegate his work so that he might actually make their meeting on time, well, that was for only himself to know. When he caught sight of Ferdinand, still hunched over his desk and scribbling hurriedly against parchment, he smiled softly. His hair was pulled into a neat ponytail and tied in the back with a dark purple ribbon. A few wispy hairs fell onto his face as he wrote, and Hubert flexed his fingers as he felt the urge to brush them behind his ear. The evening sunlight, which streamed through the windows, fell against Ferdinand like an angelic glow that made evident the constellation of freckles across his cheeks and the bridge of his nose. His perfectly shaped brows were turned downwards in concentration, and Hubert wanted nothing more than to kiss away the frown that had settled against his face. "Hello, darling," said Ferdinand, as he turned to look at the man who had come to stand beside him. Hubert hummed, as he gave in to his desire to brush aside the little hairs in his face, and his palm rested against his cheek for a moment, allowing Ferdinand to lean into the warmth of his palm. "I am sorry for the delay. After I finish this letter to Lorenz, we can be off." "Take your time," said Hubert, and he let him return to his work as he wandered around the room. Unlike his own office, Ferdinand's was always full of light and bright colours, with little trinkets scattered everywhere, and a vase of flowers that he changed near constantly to liven up the room. The air also smelled nicer here, and he wasn't sure if it was because of some sort of incense, or merely the wafting of Ferdinand's perfume that encompassed everything, but he loved it all the same. In comparison, his own office was often dark and drab, with little colour, and absolutely no flowers. Well, with the exception of the ones Ferdinand gifted to him often. He liked it that way, of course, but he also enjoyed coming here and working with Ferdinand from time to time. Sometimes they would talk, other times they worked silently, and would merely look up from time to time to smile at each other. It was pleasant, peaceful, and Hubert enjoyed it immensely. "You are writing to Lorenz," you said. "How has he been?" he asked. He heard Ferdinand chuckle at the question, not intending to mock him, as he would never do such a thing. It was more a soft, teasing sound that filled Hubert's heart and cheeks with warmth. "Sorry, Hubert, I did not mean to laugh. It is just amusing hearing you ask about him concerning how, stubborn you both can be with one another." It was true that he and Gloucester did not often get along, for while they often traded heated barbs and sarcastic quips, he did not wish ill on the man. Most of the time, anyways. To answer your question, though, he has been doing well. More than well, it seems, as he and Claude have recently become engaged. Hubert nodded as he came to the window behind Ferdinand's desk and peered out into the gardens below. "Is that so?" He was not a man to let irrationality get the better of him, but the mention of marriage made his heartbeat race a little faster, and he could feel sweat on his hands as it began to stick to his gloves, and he held them together behind his back to steady himself. One day, he told himself, one day he and Ferdinand would also be married. Or he hoped so, at least. Now was not exactly the time for such things, but he couldn't help himself, as his mind travelled to thoughts of their wedding, of Ferdinand's bright smile when he looked at him with all the love in the world. One day, he thought again, and again, and again, and again, as if perhaps chanting it might make it quicken, so that they could at last be together, though at the moment He would concede that being with Ferdinand at all was a blessing, and to be able to love him, to call him his, was like the sweetest of dreams. "Hubert, darling, are you ready to go?" Ferdinand asked, and though the jolt of his body was evident, he would never admit to being startled by the call of his name. He looked at Ferdinand, who was standing now, and examining him with those dazzling amber eyes of his. His entire expression seemed to be lit up by the lovely smile he fixed him with, and Hubert was almost blinded by its beauty. "Yes, but first," he said, as he took Ferdinand's hand in his, and pulled him towards him. Their lips met clumsily, and with a tender hunger that made Hubert dizzy with delight. Kissing Ferdinand was always like magic, better than magic even, as his entire body came alive with the warmth of his lover against him. He would do anything for this man, he realized, and not for the first time. He adored him so much, and no amount of words could ever convey that as loudly as he wished to express it. "What was that for?" Ferdinand asked, when he finally pulled away and placed his hands on Hubert's shoulder. "No reason. It was simply because I love you," he replied, and wrapped his arms tightly around his waist. "Oh, Hubert!" He brought his hand to brush aside Hubert's fringe, so that he could see both his eyes clearly, and Hubert in turn could see a similar, and perhaps far more beautiful, blush spreading across his face. "I love you too."